Hello chess fans, today we're going to be doing another tournament recap of a tournament I played in. You can join the tournament in the first link in the description. I'm going to get off with game 1, which started off with b3, e5, bishop b2, knight c6, e3, d5, and bishop b5. So this is called a Nimzo Larsen attack, and it often has the idea of putting pressure on the center from afar. You see these bishops are both eyeing the center, and this knight is defending the center. So black has to defend it with bishop d6, and after f4, if we take here, we lose the pawn on g7. Black has a choice to make, either to play queen h4 or to play f6. But in this game, black decided to do neither and play d4, which is considered a mistake, but it's very hard to deal with practically. Immediately white blunders. Instead of, they could have taken here, but instead they play knight f3. Black blunders back, but this is not much of a blunder because black would have to have seen that the complications would have not been good for them. And we get this position in which black's pieces are very loose, but black has a lot more development and a lot more open lines, and white pieces are very badly coordinated. So after knight e7, we already see h3 a blunder. Here it's pretty simple that white should have castled, but after h3 we see a very nice move by black, bishop g3, forcing the king not to be able to castle. And after king h1, knight f5, immediately, still not caring about this, everything comes with tempo, threatening knight e3, bishop c1 to defend, and now finally we just move back and we put pressure on the pin like this. Bishop e3, a minor mistake. Black should have played castles and tried to bring in the pawn and the other rook, but after bishop e4, e5 comes another mistake, and after queen h6, it's simply impossible to defend here with the threat being takes, and then taking here. And after knight e4, we see that immediately black gets a way in. There's no way to defend this pawn, because if you were to go here, we can take this, and you can't go here or here. So there's no way to defend that pawn. So here black wins a pawn and then wins another pawn, and from here it was just clean up. Black pushes the pawns from their king and completes a very nice attack. In this position, white resigned. So that was a 2200 as black versus a 2000. Next, let's look at how a 2000 as black destroys a 1500. So the game started off with d4, e6, bishop f4, c5, and here we see basically the traps of a London. So after e3, knight c6, c3, bishop b6, knight a3, threatening knight b5, and to get into here, we see the 2000 actually blunder, and in this position white would be completely winning. So London is definitely a great opening for beginners with a lot of traps that even higher rated players can fall into. Knight b5, and here we see there's pretty much no way to defend this. If you were to give up this, you would probably be immediately lost. After it takes, the king would have to move, and it's just a very unpleasant position. So instead, black decides to play e5, and after d takes e5 to play knight g7, looking forward to knight g6 possibly. And here actually white had a winning move. This position is +9, and see if you can take a second to find it. I recommend you pause the video if you didn't see it yet. The move is rook b1, with the idea that after queen takes a2, we have the very nice move bishop c4, attacking the queen. And if the queen were to take, we'd have knight d6 with a fork on the king and the queen, so the queen would have to go to e5, in which case we can win the other sort of f7 pawn. You can also immediately, if you want, go for knight d6 and then taking here, which is a little bit better because it moves the king. But yeah, both of those are good options. In the game, white ends up showing that they're a much lower rated player and playing knight c7. And after king d8, they take here, which is another blunder, because after queen takes c3, we're going to have to play king e2, which is something we don't want to do, but instead white blunders, and from here the game was over. But as we can see from the opening, black had a huge disadvantage and white was completely winning. So third, we're going to look at one of my games from the tournament, and the game started off with e4, e5, knight f3, d6. So my opponent played the Philidor. I'm rated around 2400. My opponent was around 2100 in this game. So I played d4, breaking in the center, and they played knight c6, a move that I had never seen before. And so immediately when you see a move you've never seen before, you should try thinking about all the possible options. So I didn't want to play d5 because after knight e7, there's often position where f5, g6 looks like an improved King's Indian, and that's not something I want to play. I didn't want to play d takes because the exchanges just look bad compared to like the bishop g4 or knight f6 variation. So I decided to instead of trying to punish my opponent for this like sort of bad opening, I decided to stick to principles and play an opening I knew, bishop b5, transposing into the Steinitz variation, which is also a very respectable line, but against a specific move order, there's probably better things to do. But bishop b5 is definitely a good move. So e takes, knight takes, bishop d7. Here I played knight c3, and if my opponent were to play knight f6, we would transpose to the 4 knights through Lopez, but my opponent decided to play bishop e7 instead, which is a little bit of a strange move. Not sure why they didn't play either knight f6 or g6. But here I castled, developing my pieces, knight f6, and here I think I made a very good decision, and this decision is the favorite by the engine, and it's not the most popular decision in the book. The most popular is to go here to not lose a tempo, and then to go queen f3, and the idea is to either play e5 or knight f5 and win the bishop pair somehow. For example, if they castle, we can immediately have e5, and after takes here, we have takes here, winning the bishop pair. or sorry, destroying the bishop pair. And here black is just worse because they have more pawn islands, and white has a 3-on-2, and white's a little bit more active here. But instead I went for a decision I like more, which is knight takes c6, which preserves our bishop pair as white, also gives black this horrible structure, and I think is a lot more easy to understand because after f4 e5, like, these bishops are just eyeing up as monsters, and here the engine already says it's plus 1.5. So after castles, I went f4, continuing the plan. King h8, pretty much doing nothing. Here black really had to play d5, and after e5, the position is slightly unclear, with black getting some pressure on the dark squares. Here this position would still be 1.5, but I don't think this is as pleasant as the engine makes it seem. But instead my opponent went king h8, which is pretty much a nothing move. My opponent was just trying to flag me, I guess, because they were moving incredibly fast. I go h3. Now after d5, there's no knight g4. So my opponent goes knight g8, trying to play f5. Here I go queen f3, indirectly preventing f5, but my opponent, I don't think, saw why I was preventing f5. I'm also bringing my queen into the attack, and I was preparing either e5 or f5 myself. So after f5 myself, this might be a nice idea for black to bring the knight to e5. So my opponent played f5, and here I took here, and I won the pawn, and now white is just simply up a pawn, and now we get into the conversion part of this game. My opponent played queen e8, and here one thing you should note is that most players would take here, probably trade queens. Oh, we're up material, but I didn't want to trade queens because I thought, okay, look at my other pieces. My rook is decent, my knight is decent, and my queen is decent. Right now, their rook is bad, their knight is bad, and their queen is pretty bad. So I don't think we should trade queens and get rid of one of my good pieces and activate one of their bad pieces. So instead I went queen f4, attacking this. Rook f7, and now I made the rook worse. Bishop d2, developing the bishop. There was really nowhere else for it to go. I could have also gone b3, bishop b2, but for some reason I thought after bishop f6 that was slightly unpleasant. So bishop d2, rook b8, b3, defending my pawn. Bishop f6, rook a1, we trade some more. This is again a bad trade, but again, this knight is never getting out if we don't do that trade. For example, here I was expecting my opponent to play knight f7, and the best move here would be to go g4 and g5, but I don't think I saw that in the game, and I wasn't really thinking too much about this game because I was just thinking I was going to win it pretty easily. But after bishop takes c3, my opponent goes rook f8, I go g3, and here I really expected my opponent to try to play in g5, possibly go h6, king h7, and g5, but instead my opponent, I think, made a bad move, which is knight f6, which I don't think really plays into what their plan is. Knight e2, and here my opponent goes king g8, which I think was pretty easy for me. And right now in this position, I decided to go king g2 just to improve. It doesn't really do much. Maybe I could have gone for rook e1, and after knight d5 gone bishop e2, but after rook g2 my opponent went rook e8, which I think is another mistake. And here I don't want to trade because I simply thought that having the rook on the e file was more important. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Takes. My opponent went king f8. I went bishop d4, attacking the a7 pawn, and also trying to goad my opponent into playing c5 and putting more of their pawns on the dark squares. But my opponent played a6, what I think is the right decision. I played bishop b2. I just wanted to play fast here because my opponent was playing incredibly fast. And here my opponent made the position very easy for me to win by playing rook e7. And here this is just simply a winning king and pawn endgame. And I'll just go over briefly how to win this type of position. Now, one thing you got to know is to make a pass pawn on two sides of the board, because then that way the king can't develop, can't defend. And when you're up a pawn, this is sometimes hard because sometimes you can only make on one, but usually if you can make one either far away and distract the king, or you can make two, then you're very well set. And here I can pretty easily make two. So one thing to be careful about here is I very much do not want to take this. This is still winning for me, but it becomes a hard win because now the king has infiltration squares. So instead of that, I ignored that. And here I decided to make my second pass pawn. So my one pass pawn is going to be here, the other pass pawn is going to be here with b5 takes, and the king can't simply stop both. So my opponent goes king d7, I went f5, creating the first pass pawn. The king tries to stop it, I went b5, creating the second pass pawn. And yeah, here my opponent resigned because of the fact that they can't stop both pass pawns. So next, let's go into the next game, which is between a 2150 as black and a 2000 as white. The 2000, this is the same 2000, starts off with b3, c5. And we see a sort of Sicilian-like position. I still like white's setup here. I think maybe knight f3 was a little bit rushed. Maybe you can keep more flexible with a move like e3, but it's not a bad move, of course. And here, white simply attacks black's position and gets the bishop pair. And here white was doing extremely well. Right now there's a threat on the knight on c6, rook c8. Queen g2 was a little bit confusing, but it's kind of understandable because white wants to play f4. I think a better move might have been castles, or a better move even yet would have been apparently g5, which I don't entirely understand, but castles definitely makes a lot of sense. Queen g2 takes. Here white gives up their bishop, which is kind of bad. f4 attacking the center. Again, white should really castle here first. And here we see king d7, a very inexplicable move. Very hard to explain this move. because the natural move d5, maybe white was worried about g5, but after rook e6 you will have knight e4 and you will be defending the position. So slightly confusing why king d7 was played, but yeah, you generally shouldn't play this move. So g5, knight h5, and after knight d5, covering the king's retreating squares and also threatening the bishop in some positions. Black played rook e8, which is, I mean, it's just a complete blunder because it's just mate here after queen g4, f5, and g takes f6 would be mate. But the opponent missed that, and it's not hard to miss that because it is very unexpected. So here the opponent checked, and still white has a huge initiative here. Blunders it a little bit back. Again, white should probably try to go for f takes g6, takes, and the knight would be hanging. And that would just be a complete win because we're also threatening here. And if they take back, I think simple enough is to probably just take the queen because that is a free queen. I can't believe I missed that. Okay, but knight e3. And here white wins a pawn, and white just has a huge initiative here. And then white wins a rook, and black resigns because next move is mate with rook d8. So finally, let's look at our final game between a 2200 as white and a 2000 as black. Thank you for making it all the way in the video. So the game started with e4, and we see a 4 knights Ruy Lopez, which is definitely a very nice line at near the 2000 level because it's very tricky, and white struggles to prove it. Black struggles to find equality at those levels. So knight d4 is the theoretical move for equality, and here black has a lot of options, which is why a lot of players don't play knight d5. Bishop a4, and here black goes for knight f3, which is the simplest response, but funnily enough, this is actually a bad move because of g takes f3, and the ideas of playing d3 and repeatedly going for f4, castling queenside, makes white much better here, surprisingly, but this is something that an engine would do. Instead, white does the human thing, takes with the queen. This is more played in the master database too. Bishop b4, d3, and here we see white sort of develop an initiative attacking the king, which is why this knight takes f3 line is not that good. And here we see white play the nice move, rook takes h3, and this knight has pretty much no safe squares. For example, if they were to go knight h5, we could go knight d5, threatening here. Black would have to go king d7. For example, if they don't go king d7, then this would just be mate after here. There's no way to defend that. So they have to go king g7. Or sorry, after knight d6, they'd have to go king g7. But then after f3, the bishop has no way to stay attached to the knight, and they would lose either the knight or the bishop here. For example, if bishop e6, rook takes h5 would be winning for the white pieces. So instead of that, black decided to go king g7, not save the knight. F takes g3. Rook h8, rook h4 was a nice move, and here the opponent played rook h5, which is a blunder, but it's kind of hard to explain why it's a blunder. It simply just wastes a move because this knight d5 is a very nice move by white. Instead, what black should have probably done is either take the rook on h4, and here white is up some pawns, but black has a safer king because white's king can't castle. Black has some ideas of f6 pressuring these pawns, and black has the bishop pair, so this position would only be slightly better for white. But after rook h5, knight d5, this position was pretty much untenable for the black pieces after queen takes g5. And then, here, white makes an inexplicable blunder. This pawn on c7 is just completely free. I have no idea why it wasn't taken. But king d2, here they kick him out. And black wins the pawn back, and this position is just a simple draw. Not much to be said here. d4, a blunder because they should really, keep their pawns safe. d4 just creates an unnecessary weakness, and here black could have won the game finally, the last chance to win the game with b5, bishop b3, c5, c4. Hard to see, but this is generally a common trap in the Noah's Ark trap, which you can see linked in the cards to my e4, e5 explained video. Bishop e2 misses it. b4 again doesn't really make any sense. Black could have won the game here with e5 immediately activating their king. King activity is very important in the endgame, but both players were not too familiar with endgames here. Again, e5 would have won the game because the king could have come in. Instead, white plays a4, and finally white has their last chance to win the game with king d5, and they miss it again and play c4, which basically is just an offer of a draw, and here they agree to a draw. So that's the end of today's tournament recap. If you want to be in this tournament recap, please remember to join the tournament at the first link in the description. It is a team where the tournaments take place, and they happen every month, and I will always cover the best games, usually one of my games and 4 of the other games, because usually I'm near the top seed. So let's see who won this tournament. So the reason why I didn't show this tournament for a while was because I believe that first place was a cheater, and they were in fact a cheater. Also, if MinHQ, if you could tell me like your username, who you are, maybe down in the comments below. I also do believe, unfortunately, that you use some assistance, but I do not want to make any accusations without you actually properly being able to refute such claims. And I also obviously came second in this tournament. So I would like to see you guys in the next video, and I'll see you guys then.